welcome to our session on Economic Survey of India. In this video, we'll be covering Chapter 6 of Economic Survey of India. The Chapter 6 is titled Process Reforms, Enabling Decision Making Under Uncertainty. Okay, so this chapter, basically, just first try to understand what this chapter is trying to say. It is saying that in India, there is over-regulation of everything. And this over-regulation needs to change if we need to bring in a efficient system for businesses. And that is why process reform. The name of the chapter is Process Reform, Enabling Decision Making Under Uncertainty. So process reform wala aspect you understand? Now enabling decision making under uncertainty. What is the overall idea that this chapter would be covering? Let me tell you that again in one sentence. Here basically they're saying that regulations are basically trying to ensure that in future problems should not occur. That is, if a business is running, if it's following all the regulations, then these problems would not be there. Okay, so enabling decision making under uncertainty, they're saying that no type of regulation will be able to cover all the issues, all the concerns that may emerge. And by trying to make your regulation very complex, make your regulation such that it covers all the scenarios, you are unnecessarily making your regulations more and more complex. And Economic Survey of India is suggesting some changes, some reforms. We'll talk about all that. But overall, the topic is about how the regulatory framework in the country needs to reform to promote ease of doing business, to ensure easy functioning of businesses, to ensure better economic scenario in the country. Okay. So, in general, it is believed that in India, I'm starting this chapter now. In general, it is believed that in India, regulatory framework is not followed properly. Whatever regulations are there, we are not following it properly. And this has become the major regulatory problem in India. It is something that is believed, but that's not true. Economic Survey of India says that we are ranked better than our peers when it comes to regulatory standards and compliance to the process. Like what regulations do we have and how much of the compliance of that regulation is happening. In that, we are doing better than our peers. What we are not doing better is in that compliance, there's a lot of corruption. In that compliance of that regulatory framework, there are lots of delays. Those are the areas in which we are not functioning properly. So it's not like compliance is a problem. Compliance there are some problems, but people tend to follow compliance. Businesses tend to follow compliance. In fact, there's a World Rule of Law Index. Who publishes Rule of Law Index? We have already covered it in international bodies. World Justice Project. What was the other report by World Justice Project? Revise. This was also asked in prelims 2018. We had covered this in class. Please revise it properly. So anyways, come to Rule of Law Index. In Rule of Law Index, there are various dimensions. Regulatory enforcement. Government regulation are effectively enforced. Government regulations are applied and enforced without improper influence. Administrative proceedings are conducted without unreasonable delay. And due process is respected in administrative proceedings. These are the 4 dimensions. Here you will see, in case of India, when it comes to due process is respected in administrative proceedings, we are ranked good. Our rank is 45. What does it mean? When compared to our peers in India, the respect for the process, the respect for the regulations is there. It's good enough. But what are we bad at? Administrative proceedings are conducted without unreasonable delay. Timeliness. When it comes to timeliness with which regulations are being followed, we are doing badly. Our rank is 89. When it comes to improper influence, corruption, rent seeking, our rank is 107. When it comes to government regulations are effectively enforced, is government able to enforce all the provisions of the regulations? Our rank is 104. So it is not the compliance. In compliance, due process is respected in administrative proceedings. We are doing good. And not only this, our performance in compliance, our rank right now is 45, but this rank has kept on improving over the last few years. Whereas in other areas, in timeliness, in undue influence dimension, our rank has deteriorated. Do you understand what's happening? So when we say that, okay, the compliance of regulation in India is poor, that's not true. There are problems with the way regulations are being done. People are complying with regulations much more than what is happening in other countries. Okay, now India is quite good at complying with process but lag in regulatory effectiveness. Regulations are not effective enough, but we are complying with the regulations. Now, this was the conclusion from Rule of Law Index by World Justice Project. Similarly, we come to similar conclusion by various studies of World Bank. World Bank publishes an index called Regulatory Quality Index. According to this also, when it comes to here it's not saying compliance, regulation ka quality kaisa hai. In Regulatory Quality Index, despite improvement in India's regulatory quality, it is still much lower than UK, US, Singapore and Japan. In the same way, in ease of doing business report, our rank has improved over the last few years. Yes, rank has improved. But when it comes to starting a business and registering property, our country's rank is 136 and 154 respectively. So when we start a business, there are a lot of compliances which has to be followed. People are following those compliances, and that's why it takes a lot of time. That's why our rank is bad. So we are complying, but regulatory framework is not good enough. Regulatory framework is not effective. Regulatory framework is leading to a lot of delay, leading to a lot of corruption. And that is something that needs to change. In fact, for Economic Survey of India, Quality Council of India did a study. For this particular chapter, Quality Council of India did a study to understand how much time does it take for a, let's say, Levelup IAS. This institution gets closed today. Let's say it doesn't remain financially viable and we close this institution. We do not have any litigations against it. We have fulfilled all government requirements. But even then, for closing this institution, it will take roughly 4.5 years. Around 4.3 years, 15-70 days on an average. We'll have to get permission from GST. Like there will be a lot of paperwork where we have to get clearance from income tax, provident fund, GST departments, and so on. The system is so, even if I want to close this business, to eventually get Levelup IAS Edutech Private Limited's name removed from the corporate laws registered companies list, I'll have to wait for 15-70 days. Whereas in countries like Singapore, it can be done in 12 months. Your whole process can be completed in 12 months. So you're understanding, I'll be following, compliance would be there, but regulation unnecessary would be there. Regulations would be unnecessary, regulation would be complex, regulations would be unnecessary, complex, and not effective. This is the problem of the regulatory framework in India. I hope you're understanding. Now come to inevitability of incomplete regulation. Let's understand this. What is incomplete regulation and why incomplete regulations are inevitable? What is this inevitability of incomplete regulations? Let's understand this. See, we are saying that we are going for over regulation. That's why so much of time is happening, so much of time is there, we are going for incomplete regulation, or we are going for over regulation, because we do not understand that in a world of uncertainty, complete regulation is not possible. There will be always be incomplete regulation and incomplete contract. Please understand it again. It's a bit complex, and for many of you who are not from economy background, if you'll focus a bit, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to understand. I'm saying that our regulatory processes are complex, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to go for complete regulation. Every dimension, every possible step should be properly covered by our regulation. But we forget the fact that the world is uncertain. You cannot cover for everything that may come in future. So incomplete regulation and incomplete contract both are inevitable. Why? Why we are saying that real world contracts are inherently incomplete, or real world contracts, because contracts are incomplete, उन contracts को regulate करने के लिए regulations may also have to be incomplete. Why are contracts incomplete? Let us say मैं पार्थ के साथ एक बिजनेस कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में जाता हूं, लेवलअप आईएएस goes with पार्थ एजुटेक प्राइवेट लिमिटेड के साथ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में. In contract, one, we'll say that this contract will not be complete because humans are boundedly rational. What is boundedly rational? We are not completely rational, we are boundedly. Our rationality is restricted by unknowns of future. We may think that we have created a complete contract, but there may be certain situations that may come in future. In 2019, no one had predicted that because of COVID-19 institutions would close down. So there are so many unknowns in future that our rationality, our ability to cover all the dimensions are bounded. So humans are boundedly rational. This is one key reason because of which contracts are incomplete. Other is complexity in framing contract arises from difficulties involved in anticipating and specifying all obligations for all parties. This is something that I have been explaining. In our contract, all obligations for all parties covering all possible circumstances will not be possible, because future comprises of unknown unknowns. If future comprises of unknown unknowns, how can we in our contract cover those unknown unknowns? And finally, third thing, because of which say that the contract is incomplete, is that a third party may be able to observe outcomes ex post. After our contract has been implemented, a third party may come and say, oh, see, you did not do this, see, you did not do this. But can't verify ex ante decisions unambiguously. Right now, we bring that party before the contract. We say that this is our contract. That person will not be in a position to say, oh, you have missed this or you have missed that. You're getting my point? So initially that person may not be able to find all the flaws, but later he would come, oh, you sold your company at a lower price. You did not evaluate it properly. You did not value it properly. Ex post, people do that. But here, so contract would be incomplete. And if incomplete contract is reality, contract will never be complete. If incomplete contract is a reality, it means regulations would also be incomplete. Because in regulations, what we are doing, we are trying to cover for all the aspects, all the dimensions. So regulations will also be incomplete. Fine. Now, so what we have covered is, we have said that incomplete contract and incomplete regulations are inevitable. Right? They are inevitable. But now a question comes, does detailed regulation reduce discretion? If we make our regulations detailed, if we cover each and every dimension of the topic, will it reduce discretion? That is, people who are the regulatory bodies, will they be able to function everything as per the book? And will there be less chance of they doing things at their own discretion? Because at the time they do things at discretion, there are chances that they may be involved in corruption. So will detailed regulation reduce discretion? Economic Survey of India is saying that no. The complex rules and regulation create more discretion. It does not reduce it. Further, when rules and regulations are complex, it increases opacity and makes it difficult for third party to monitor how the discretion was exercised. Here, if rules and regulations are very complex, third party will not be able to evaluate whether all these rules and regulations were exactly implemented. Okay, so thus a complex, uncertain world makes discretion inevitable. If a world is complex, discretion is inevitable. But if over-regulation happens, discretion is inevitable. Discretion, if you are going for detailed regulation, even then discretion is inevitable. But because your contract is, if your contract is incomplete and thus your regulation is incomplete, even then discretion is inevitable. Discretion is inevitable. That you have to understand. But that discretion becomes opaque if there is over-regulation. If over-regulation is there, what happens in that scenario? Third party cannot evaluate whether something that I'm doing at my discretion was as per the norms or not, because the system is very complex. That's what they are trying to show here. A complex, uncertain world makes discretion inevitable, where over-regulation, not simpler regulation, leads excessive and opaque discretion. So now we'll show that in India, how over-regulation is leading to more discretion. So first of all, how are we measuring over-regulation? In measuring over-regulation, we are saying that, let's say I want to get permission for construction site, for my construction work. So different states have different way of regulating it. Some state may give the permission officially, technically in 80 days. Some may take 100 days, some may take 120 days, and so on. So the state which takes highest days is the state which has higher regulation. So this is one way of measuring how much of regulation is there. Now we are saying that, will higher regulation lead to more discretion? So if higher regulation was leading to more discretion, that is, people were doing things at their own, then the delays that would have occurred will also be higher. In case regulation is higher, this shows that as number of days, de jure days, that is days that should have been taken to complete or taken to give permission, is increasing, number of days which are varying, which are beyond the legal number of days, are also increasing, indicating that you make your laws, regulations more complex, covering every dimension, which is taking more time. But even then, you are taking much more time beyond that to give permission. Over-regulation leading to increased discretion. This is not only the case here, even for getting operating license. For getting operating license in the country, the states which have technically or de jure higher value, higher number of days, the states which legally takes more number of days, that is the states which are more regulated, their number of higher number of days, more number of days which are taken for giving license increases. Did you understand? So here they're saying that by this proof we can say that over-regulation leads to increased discretion. Over-regulation, like because you're covering every dimension, it does not mean that people will follow the norms and discretion would not be there. Discretion is there even after over-regulation. Not only this, there are other studies also which tell the same thing. So there was a study by Canbour and Ronconi in 2016 which says that, which was published in 2016, which says that labor laws across the country shows that stringency of labor regulation correlates negatively with the intensity of enforcement. That is, more stringent your labor laws are, उसका enforcement उतना ही weak हो रहा है. It means more complex laws are leading to unnecessary compliances. We are still complying with the law, but laws are not getting implemented. Laws are not effective. That is, more rigid, complex regulation increases the compliance burden, but is not leading to effectiveness. That regulation is not being implemented. Similarly, there's an international example also. There is what is known as Dodd-Frank Act. Dodd-Frank Act was brought in United States after the 2008 global financial crisis. Global financial crisis, it was because banks were behaving in a very irrational manner, because of which the global financial crisis occurred. A bubble was created, like loans were given to people without considering their credit value, without considering their ratings. So by Dodd-Frank Act, they tried to increase the regulation of the banks. They said, let us regulate banks properly so that we do not end up in the same situation again. But while doing regulation, they increased regulations so much that implementing those regulations became infeasible. This is complexity risk. Several studies have shown that it created a new kind of problem called complexity. Over-regulation created new kind of problem called complexity risk. Here, the legislation required bank boards to be responsible for 184 additional activities which may be unnecessary or even impossible. Some of the regulations required bank board to be responsible to 184 additional activities. Banks of boards were supposed to do 184 additional activities which was unnecessary or even impossible to do. So what all these examples, चाहे वो getting construction permit in India or all these different examples show, it says that having more stringent regulation may actually mean that exercise of discretion on ground is more. More the regulation, people will not be following that regulation, more discretion would be on the ground, not less. Thus, it is clear that in a world full of uncertainty and complexity, it's not possible to substitute effective supervision with more prescriptive regulation. Just by regulating things, you will not be able to get things implemented properly. You have to supervise how the process is going on. Okay, now the problem of regulatory default. What is this problem of regulatory default? Let's understand this. See, generally, here the problem of regulatory default is this. Whenever a problem occurs, governments all over the world, they tend to increase the regulation. This is regulatory default. Why do they do that? Because it's an easy solution for them. For regulators, oh, this is the problem, let us put one more condition. Oh, this is the problem, let us put one more condition. Oh, another problem, let us put one more condition. That's one thing, but it's also because it's easy to say that regulatory framework has been compliant with. This has been done, this has been done, this has been done, this has been done, this has been done. So they cannot be held accountable in future. They'll say, see, I followed all the regulatory, like I ensured that all the regulatory framework was implemented. When it comes to supervision, whether that company is working effectively, properly or not, supervision cannot be quantified like this. It's something like, suppose I'm given the responsibility of ensuring that you people are scoring good marks in your 10th examination. Will my focus not be on ensuring that you get good marks rather than, and my evaluation will also be done on that basis, how well you are scoring rather than your overall development. So focus would be on, okay, this is done, this is done, this is done, this is done, these students are getting good scores. Same is the scenario here. So in general, people tend to choose regulatory mechanism because creating regulations are easier. One. Dusra, showing that we fulfilled all regulation is also easier. So governments tend to do this. So here we are saying that if legal and institutional framework don't explicitly limit mushrooming of regulation, अगर law और institutions mushrooming regulations को explicitly रोक नहीं रहा है, policy makers may drift towards more regulation even if it is suboptimal for the economy. We have seen that more regulation is not good for economy, but even then policy makers would shift towards that. It's because making it easier for regulator, it makes it easier for regulator to follow and reduce their accountability. We have followed all the norms of regulation, our accountability is done. Okay, so in this scenario, overall in the system, some limitations come. One limitation is more regulations are added over time regardless of its effectiveness. More and more, more and more. In fact, recently Commerce Ministry's report of the high-level advisory group has noted that in banking sector, maze of complex and stringent regulations have come. They say that in order to prevent black money, round tripping, you have come up with so much regulation that it has made the functioning of financial sector difficult. They compare it to you are doing something like, because road accidents may happen, do not promote transportation sector, make transportation difficult. That's not something that should be done. By over-regulating, you should not create a situation where functioning of that organization becomes difficult. Second, so one problem that is occurring is this. Second is, discretion is not provided or exercised even when there is a case to do so. What is this scenario? Discretion is not provided or exercised even when there is a case to do so. See, in India, we generally follow, when it comes to, let's say, public procurement, we follow the lowest cost method. When we have to get some road constructed, bidding would happen, and someone who will bid the lowest will be given the bid. But suppose the government officer is given an option, you choose the best bidder. Government officer tends to choose someone who on document is giving the lowest bid, in spite of the fact that government officers know that, okay, this contractor does not do good quality work. Oh, this contractor, though the bid amount of this contractor was higher, the road that this contractor would create will go on for 100 years. So this government officer may have discretion that I should choose that one, but he would not do that because regulatory framework are complex and he's focused on fulfilling all those regulations so that in future he would not be questioned. Then discretion is questioned without benefit in hindsight. That is another limitation that creeps into the system. What is this discretion being questioned with benefit in hindsight? It's like once someone has by discretion taken a decision, उसके बाद उस decision का जो outcome है, based on that they say, oh, you took this step, that's why this has happened. Suppose today we start initial public offering of this institution, Levelup Edutech Private Limited. We want to list it on Bombay Stock Exchange, and we say that the value of this institution is 50 crore rupees. But when our IPO happens, the value that comes out is 200 crore rupees. Some people may question me, oh, you predicted the value of the institution to be only 50 crore rupees. It's because of you the loss has occurred. So in public sector, this happens. When a public sector company goes for IPO, its value is predicted. But people do what is known as discretion is questioned with benefit in hindsight. Based on the information that I had, I took a discretionary decision. But that is questioned with benefit in hindsight. Like after this is implemented, it will, oh, you took a wrong decision. You benefited that organization. you benefited that. This is also because of over-regulation and not giving discretionary power to certain individuals who can take important decisions. Then government departments also follow the default precedent. What is this limitation? Government departments following default precedents. It basically means government departments will follow all the norms, whether following those norms may be good or may be bad. For example, income tax department. If the first judgment comes against income tax department, the income tax department goes and file an appeal, in spite of knowing that, oh, there is very less chance that the judgment will come in favor of us. Even then they file an appeal because the departmental norms are like that. In future, no one should question them. If you lost that case, why did you not file an appeal? This is another thing which has crept into the system. Government departments follow default precedent. Which has crept into the system because of complex regulations. So see, what was this chapter? Changing processes, reforming processes. When there's a lot of uncertainty, वहां पे आपको processes को reform करना है. Right now, these are the problems in our processes. Okay, so how do we reform it? How do we solve for discretion? That is, we need to provide certain discretion to our decision makers. They do not have to follow like exact regulatory framework or complex regulatory framework. That is disadvantages. But this discretion should be implemented transparently. It should not be something like किसी को discretion मिल गया, oh, I have to decide who will get the road contract. Let me choose my friend. This also should not happen. While some discretion should be available, that I'll choose the best possible option, not the one who's bidding at the lowest. But this discretion should not be misused. So how do we work for that? Here, following steps should be taken to keep supervisors accountable while giving them discretion. First is strengthen ex ante accountability. Ex ante accountability matlab, here they're saying that, let's say banks are there. Strengthen the boards of the bank and give them discretionary power. Right now, boards are weak. Give them discretionary power and assume that they'll be taking steps for the benefit of the bank. Do not like later if some of the decision led to some negative impact on the bank, that should not be something. Overall intention should be understood, not the small decisions which led to some disadvantage. So first we'll have to strengthen ex ante accountability in this way. Give them power and hold them accountable. Strengthen governance in institutions by vesting more power in boards and then holding them accountable. Second, bring transparency in decision making. Like decision making should not be like, I'll choose my friend. I'm choosing that company for XYZ reason. This transparency will not only improve the process but will also improve the trust of people in public institutions. Then build resilient ex post resolution mechanism. See, in spite of all this, after decision is taken, there may be disputes, and dispute resolution mechanism should be clear in India. How dispute resolution mechanism should be clear, or how dispute resolution mechanism should be effective? Court should be working efficiently. Insolvency and bankruptcy board should be working efficiently. Debt resolution tribunals जो होते हैं, those should be working effectively. We have to improve their functioning as well. Okay, these are certain things that we'll have to do. Some steps are already being taken in the right direction. Over-regulation is being reduced. For example, you must be knowing that there were large number of central labor laws. Those have been compiled into 4 labor codes. So this is a step towards reducing regulations. Similarly, last year there were some changes brought for BPO industry. BPO industry were put under a number of restrictions earlier, like work from home पे restriction था, registration was a complex process, and so on. Last year in November, on 5th November 2020, please, on 5th November 2020, government came up with some changes for BPO industry to have simplified processes for them, has simplified their registration, has simplified work from home provision or work from anywhere provision. The government is already moving in that direction. Further, in institutional architecture also, there were a number of autonomous institutions that exist in India, which adds to the overall complexity in the institutional architecture of government. A number of those institutions have been done away with. Like in line with the idea of minimum government and maximum governance, a number of organizations including All India Handloom Board, All India Handicraft Board, Cotton Advisory Board, Jute Advisory Board, all these things have been done away with. In the same way, government has also approved merger of 4 of its film media units, namely Films Division, Directorate of Film Festival, National Film Archives of India, and Children's Film Society. All these things have been merged, simplifying the process. Rather than so many institutions taking permission from different institutions, simplify the things. Certain other things could be taken. One most important step that can be taken is enacting Transparency of Rules Act. Transparency of Rules Act was also recommended by Economic Survey of India 2 years back. The idea is citizens should know what are the rules, what are the laws which are applicable. So if rules are changing, all those things should be available on the website. On the website of the department should be available who are the people who are covered by these rules, so that people exactly know what should be done, what should not be done. All departments will need to mandatorily place all citizen-facing rules on their website. Officials will not be able to impose any rule not explicitly mentioned on the website clearly. Like officials should know, oh, you did not, government officers should not do this. See, this is not done properly. I should ask them, where have you told me that this should be done? Where is it mentioned on your website? Further, all laws, rules, and regulations will have to be presented as an updated, unified whole at all the times. That is, latest law should be available, and laws in unified form should be available rather than distributed in many sources and distributed on many pages. Then this will bring transparency and simplify understanding of the regulation, and thus improve the effectiveness of regulation. Okay, so process reform needs to happen in this complex environment, in this complex situation. Okay, so this was chapter 6 of Economic Survey of India. In the next class, we'll be dealing with chapter 7 and then chapter 8, 9, 10. Okay, this was it for today.